Hey, welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces today. In the last video, we discussed the importance of starting with a foundation when we draw a portrait, really anything, but especially for a portrait, so that we can make sure we get things the right size compared to each other. That's called proportion. In case you missed that video, down in the description below, I have a link to where you can download these two pages. One shows you how to create these construction lines, and then this one actually has those physically drawn out for you already. You could go ahead and start drawing directly onto this page, but the problem with doing that is that then in the end you still have all of these lines that you would have to go back and erase. Now, if you've sketched these lines very faintly, very lightly, then that's not a problem. But for a lot of people, especially young artists, you push too hard when you draw these lines, and then when you're done with the picture, you can't go back and erase them, and you end up having lines across your face that are very distracting. So, in the interest of having a finished picture that looks nice and clean and doesn't have all these lines on it, what we're going to do is take this page, which has these nice thick bold outlines that can be seen through another paper. I'm going to tape this paper to the back of my drawing paper. And I'm just going to tape it at the top and at the bottom. I don't have to have it perfect, but just the best you can get it. And then I can flip this over, and these construction lines will stay in place because I've taped it together, and in the end I won't see all of these lines on my finished drawing. Alright, zooming in here so that we can focus on the eyes. This video is going to focus entirely on how to draw eyes. And before we get started, I think a great question that we have to answer is, what's the most difficult thing about drawing eyes? If you've drawn eyes in the past, what's the hardest thing to do? Most of my students say symmetry, getting the two eyes to look the same. I used to have that problem where I would draw one eye, make it perfect, and then when I draw the other eye, it would look good by itself, but not the same as the first one. And I had that problem until about a year ago when I saw a video, link in the description, by a man named Mark Crilly. I highly recommend his YouTube channel, by the way, where he recommended that instead of drawing one eye until it's finished, and then drawing the other eye until it's finished, draw them both at the same time. That doesn't mean I'm going to use two pencils. I definitely would not do well with that. What it does mean, though, is I'm going to jump back and forth between the two and draw a part at a time on both sides, and then move on to the next part. So here's what I mean. I'll start by drawing the tear duct on both sides. The tear duct is that part right above your nose where if you're boo-hooing, tears come out of there. And notice that that's just a little C shape that is right at the eye line and barely touches the outside of the eye circle. Now, again, I can look at those and see if they're the same or close enough to the same. They don't have to be exactly perfect. And they're close enough, so I'm going to move on. The next thing I'll do is draw the iris and pupil in the middle of both eyes. Now, the iris typically is 1/3 the diameter of the eyeball itself. So once I've drawn the iris in one eye, I can also draw it on the other side. I can measure them to see that they're the same. I can measure the space around it, the placement within the eye to make sure it's centered on both eyes. If you have one off to this side and one off to the other side, it's going to look really weird, but having them both centered in the same spot on the eye is exactly what you want. Now the iris is the colored part of the eye. There's also a pupil in the middle of that. The pupil changes size depending on ambient light, but a good rule of thumb is about 1/3 of the iris. Again, 1/3 the diameter of the iris. Before I darken in those pupils, I also want to consider highlights. Let's imagine that the light is shining in from the top right angle. If the light is shining in from the top right angle, then there's going to be a highlight, which can be drawn as a circle or an oval. And I didn't do those exactly the same, so I need to fix one of them. And notice that that highlight overlaps the pupil and the iris a little bit. To make that overlapping visible, we erase the part of the pupil that is under it. Now I can darken in those pupils, but not darken in the area that's highlighted. Next, before we shade in the iris, we need the eyelids because they're going to cover part of the iris up. Here's how the eyelids work. The top eyelid will come from the top of the tear duct. It will curve up, and if you're just seeing a generic facial expression, not like super excited, not angry or anything, just a generic facial expression, this top eyelid is going to rest right on top, maybe cover up just barely the top of the iris. And it will overlap the eye circle here by just a hair. And I literally mean just a hair. There's hair on your eyelid. It's called eyelashes. Just a hair here, a little bit. Now the hard part, making it match on the other side. I do it the same way. I start at the tear duct and work my way out. So I start at the tear duct and I work my way out. And I curve it up, rest it right on top of the iris, and overlap the eye circle by just a hair. All right, let me turn off the light box so you can see the eyes there a little bit better. And while we're talking about eyelashes, the hair on your eyelids, I want to talk about what not to do. A lot of people, when they draw the eyes, draw these huge eyelashes that come way out, and it looks like a spider. Ah, no! Instead, we're just going to leave that one for now, and if you want to darken up the eyelashes and make some more, we'll talk about how you can do just minimal little details to make a huge impact. But first, let's finish this lower eyelid. Now, the lower eyelid, again, for a generic facial expression, is going to cut off the bottom of the iris. So what I'm doing here is making it kind of flat straight across until it covers over the bottom tiny portion of the iris, and then it'll curve up to where the upper eyelid crosses the eye circle. And then again, make the other side match, almost straight across, and then curve up. Now, I'm looking at this and seeing that this side is a little bit wider, this side is a little bit narrower. And that's because on this eye, this upper eyelid curves up and over. Here, it curves down and out. So there's different shapes for different people's eyes. What I need to do is just make them match each other. So I'll change one of them to look more like the other one. I'm not going to change them both. I'm not going to erase everything and start over. And this lower eyelid goes out a little further before it bumps up. There, now they look a little bit more similar. If I wanted to be really nitpicky, this curves down and in a little bit. I could do that here as well. But I don't need to worry about every tiny little detail if I'm just practicing. Now, before I move on, I need to erase those little bits of the iris that come down underneath or below or behind that eyelid. And now we're ready to talk more about our spider eyes, or how to not make a spider eye. Now, as we begin to discuss eyelashes and how to draw them, we need to have a brief discussion about feminine and masculine. Now, when I say femme or feminine, what I'm talking about is traits that look girly or ladylike, female, femme, feminine. And when I talk about masculine or masculine, I'm talking about male or manly or boyish traits. Now, I use these air quotes because all men have some traits that are feminine, and all females, all women have some traits that are masculine. And it's the overall sense that you get from all of these traits combined that will make your picture, your drawing, look more feminine or more masculine. But if you're drawing a specific person, you'll need to look at that person to see what their eyelashes in this case look like, because I know some men who have very long, thick, dark eyelashes, although you would consider that to be a feminine trait. And I know some women with very short, faint, not very pronounced eyelashes, which you would consider to be a more masculine trait. Okay? So if you're drawing a specific person, you need to look at their own personal traits. But if you're just making up a person, then we can sort of idealize or in our picture represent a person with whichever kinds of traits we want. So if I was going to draw a more feminine looking person, whether it's a male who looks kind of feminine or whether I'm drawing a woman, one way that I might do that is with the eyelashes. Now, if this eye is a feminine eye, what I'm going to do is darken the eyelashes and make several of them. But notice how I'm doing this. I'm going to darken all the way across the top of the eyelash, the top of the eyelid, and add just a few little curves that come out, kind of following that curve, but then coming out. It's not a spider where they're going way the heck out there. And on the lower eyelid, they'll be even less visible. So maybe just tiny little notches. And usually they are most visible on the outside corners of the eyes. Above the tear duct over here on this side of the eye, they're not going to be as visible. They're going to be much more visible on the outside corner of the eye. Okay? So that's a more feminine way of drawing an eye. The masculine version would be to leave it as just one, maybe two. Maybe darken up that upper eyelid a little bit, but leave it as just one or two eyelashes instead of a whole bunch, okay? Also making the eye kind of open a little bigger instead of a smooth curve. Have it be a more round and then blocky on the tear duct. That can also help make it look more masculine versus feminine. So you decide on your eyes which you're going to do. And I think what I'm going to do here is go for some more masculine eyes, since I happen to be a man. But you draw it how you see fit. There, you can even see that I went back and erased a little bit because I looked and saw that it looked a little too much. Another thing is the shine on the eyes, the highlight. If you make a bigger highlighted area that you leave white, then that will look more feminine. If you make a smaller highlight that you leave white, that will look more masculine. And as we shade the rest of the eye, we've already darkened in the pupils, but as we shade the rest of the eye, we need to understand with the iris, they come in lots of different colors, right? Some people have deep, dark brown eyes, in which case the iris will be almost as dark as the pupil. Some people have very pale blue or green or hazel eyes or whatever, and in that case, the iris will be much, much lighter. But I want to focus in on a concept that will help us learn to draw any eye. And if your eyes are really dark, you might not see this, but you definitely see it on any color of eye that is lighter. And that is that the outside rim of the iris is darker than the rest. So I'm going to go ahead and shade around the edge of both irises. Iris, I think the plural of iris is iris. And then for the rest of the iris, I want to shade radially. Notice that I am coming out from the center as I shade that. I'm not like going in circles. I'm not going up and down or side to side. I'm coming out from the middle. And the reason for that is because if you look at somebody's actual iris, especially if they have light eyes, if they've got really dark brown eyes, you can't tell this as much. But if they've got really light eyes, you can see. Striations is what we call that. And those are, basically, those are the muscles that pull on the pupil to contract it or dilate it. I think I kind of overdid it a little bit there, but it's okay. Notice that in the highlighted area, I have left it completely white. Now there's one more part of the eye itself that we need to shade before we move to the outside, what's around the eyes, and that is the tear duct on both sides. The tear duct is usually slightly darker than the white of the eye, and even the white of the eye should have a little bit of shading. Remember that the light is shining this direction from the top right down, so the bottom left of each eye should have a little bit of shading on it. Not much, but a little bit, just ever so faintly shading the bottom left of each eye. Also, if the light's shining down from above, there's going to be a little bit of a shadow underneath the upper eyelid. So I'm going to just shade in ever so slightly right at the top of that eye, all the way across, where that upper eyelid is going to drop a shadow onto the eye. And those eyes are finished, but we haven't done anything around the eyes. If you look at a human's eyes, you'll see right above the eye, almost touching the top of the eye, there's this line that goes across kind of like that. What is that? That line is where the skin of your eye, when your eye opens and closes, the skin of your eyelid folds up on itself and makes that line. This is not the eyebrow. We'll do the eyebrows next. But right above, almost touching, and if you have big dark eyelashes, it might overlap. Your eyelashes might overlap that if you've got big dark eyelashes. But that is the crease, the fold of skin on your upper eyelid. Sometimes you also see this on the bottom eyelid, but usually not as much. And usually if you draw it, it makes the eyes look older. And last, for the eyes, we need to draw the eyebrows. Now, just like eyes, eyebrows come in lots of different shapes. But where should they be? If you're angry, they're going to be lower. If you're excited, or surprised, they're going to be higher. But for a general expression, right at the top of that circle we made is where your eyebrows are going to rest. That's going to be the bottom of your eyebrow. So it's going to have some thickness. It's going to be up here. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and mark the bottom and top of the eyebrow real quick. Then turn off this light box so we don't see those lines as much. And this is where we have to discover the shape of the eyebrows. Most eyebrows come pointy outside and either round or more squarish above the tear ducts. Not always, but most of the time. So what I'm going to do here is have a more squared off looking eyebrow here. By the way, the more square or rectangular or blocky shapes are, the more masculine they look. The more smoothly curving things are, the more feminine they look. So I'm just going to start. Notice that this comes right up above the tear duct here and a little bit in. So right up above the tear duct and a little bit in on this side. I'm just going one little bit at a time, and I'm already noticing that this one is a little thicker and that one's a little thinner. So I need to fix one of them. And it's okay if they're not 100% symmetrical. Just do the best you can. And the hairline here, usually the eyebrows will stop before they reach that hairline. So I made mine go a little bit too far. Now I'm looking at these and they don't look exactly the same, but they're close enough for now. If I want to shade them, I need to consider that the light is shining this way. Again, we're always keeping a consistent light source, which means that this area on the top right of the eyebrow is going to be lighter, and the rest of the eyebrow is going to be darker. And I can shade with little lines, or hatching. Hatching. If you don't know what hatching is, I've got other videos about that, or you can talk to an art teacher about it. But using hatching instead of shading gives us the texture of the hair. Again, the top right, which would be this side, needs to be lighter and get darker as it comes to the bottom left. And there you have it. That's all there is to drawing eyes. Stick around for the next video where we'll learn how to draw the nose in its place.